Welcome to the Bad News, where we ask difficult theological questions. In this episode, the difficult question is heaven biblical? In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. The opening line of the Bible begins with the creation of heaven and earth. Let's clear something up. 9 times out of 10, English translations of Genesis 1:1 will say that God created heaven and earth, which is extremely misleading. When you hear the word heaven, you automatically think of a magical place that exists outside of earth. You think of a perfect utopia where all the good Christians are transported to after they die. That's an issue because the original Hebrew isn't talking about that type of heaven. The original Hebrew word for what is commonly translated in English as heaven is shamayim, which is simply the word sky. We know this to be true because in Genesis 1 verses 7 and 8 it says, "The gods created a space that divided the water in half. They called this space shamayim. Some water was beneath the divide and some was above it." In ancient Hebrew culture, the water below the shamayim was the sea, and the water above the shamayim was the clouds, their explanation for why rain fell from the sky. This divide in most English translations is referred to as heaven, which is a bit confusing if you believe that heaven is a place outside of earth that Christians go to after they die, unless you actually believe they go to live in the sky. One more example. Genesis 1:14-17 says, "The gods said, 'Let there be lights in the shamayim to divide the day from the night, and to let them be signs to mark the seasons, days, and years. Let these lights in the shamayim shine upon the land.' The gods made 2 great lights, the greater one to govern the day, and the lesser one to govern the night, along with the stars." It is more than obvious that these lights are referring to the sun, moon, and other stars and planets we see in the sky. However, even though shamayim is clearly referring to the sky, most English Bibles translate it as heaven. There's nothing inherently wrong with using the word heaven, but it undoubtedly causes people to think of something other than what is actually being referred to, which is the sky. I believe another reason for this confusion is the word earth. As modern scientifically literate individuals today, we think of Earth as one of the countless number of planets within the universe. Earth, to us, is not all that exists in the universe. So when we read, "In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth," we believe that the word earth means the entire planet. So heaven must be separate from earth. It must be someplace outside of earth because the sky is part of earth. Therefore, the sky is included when mentioning earth. So when the writers of Genesis say heaven and earth, they must be talking about 2 separate things, right? That's an issue. We must remember that Genesis was not written by modern scientifically literate individuals. Ancient people had no understanding of outer space. To them, all that existed was what they could see, which was the sky above them and the land below them, which makes more sense when we read Genesis 1:1 in the original Hebrew, which says, "In the beginning, the gods created the sky and the land." In the original Hebrew, the word that is typically translated into the English word earth is eretz, which is the Hebrew word for land, dirt, or ground. Earth can also mean land or dirt in English, but more often than not, we tend to think of the entire planet, including Earth's atmosphere, which is the sky. However, the writers of Genesis were not referring to the entire planet. They were referring to the dirt, the ground. Understanding this allows for the word shamayim to be the sky. If you want to better understand Genesis, or even the Bible in general, I recommend mentally replacing every instance of the word heaven with the word sky, and replacing the word earth with the word land. Yes, that rule even includes the New Testament. Time to get to know some Greek. The original Greek word for what is translated into English as the word heaven is the word uranos, which means sky. We know this to be true because of the following verses. Matthew 6:26, Jesus said, "Look at the birds in the sky." The Greek word used for sky in that verse is uranos. Matthew 16:3, Jesus said, "Red sky in the morning means bad weather all day. You know how to interpret the weather signs in the sky, but you don't know how to interpret the signs of the times." The Greek words used for sky in that verse is uranos. Every instance of the English word sky in the New Testament is a translation of the Greek word uranos, which, as we just explained, means sky. Uranos is also the Greek word for what we know in English to be heaven. Yes, that even includes every instance Jesus says the kingdom of heaven. He's actually saying the dominion of the sky. Here are two examples of the word heaven being used in the New Testament. Luke 15:18, Jesus said, "I will say to my Father, I have sinned against heaven and against you." Acts 1:11, the two men dressed in white said, "Men of Galilee, why do you stand looking up into heaven? This same Jesus who was taken from you into heaven will return in the same way you saw him go up into heaven." Every instance of the word heaven in those two verses in Greek is the word uranos, the exact same word used throughout the Greek Bible for the word sky. It gets even more definitive than that. Remember how the Hebrew word for heaven in the Old Testament book of Genesis means sky? Well, guess what word is used for heaven in the Greek translation of the Septuagint scriptures of the Old Testament book of Genesis? That's right, uranos. So whether it be in the Hebrew or Greek Old Testament or in the Greek New Testament, the word heaven is always the word sky. 100% of the time, it never refers to a magical place outside of Earth. Not once. Now, for the sake of consistency, let's find out what the word earth means in Greek. Luke 8:8, Jesus said, "Some seed fell on the fertile soil." In this verse, the word soil is the English translation for the Greek word ge, and that's spelled G-E. Mark 6:47, the disciples were in their boats in the middle of the lake, and Jesus was alone on land. In this verse, the word land is the English translation for the same Greek word ge. John 17:4, Jesus said, "I brought glory to you here on earth by completing the work you gave me to do." In this verse, the Greek word ge is translated to the word earth. And finally, Hebrew 8:4 says, "If Jesus were here on earth, he would not be a priest." The word earth being a translation of the Greek word ge. In the same way that the Hebrew word eretz can mean land, ground, dirt, or soil, the Greek word ge can also mean land, ground, dirt, or soil. However, neither of them ever refer to Earth as a planet. When the biblical writers speak of heaven and earth, they're referring to aspects of the planet Earth. Heaven being Earth's sky, and earth being Earth's land and dirt. And when they speak of the sky, they're not just referring to the atmosphere alone. They're also including everything they see in the atmosphere, such as the sun, moon, stars, planets, and other galaxies. Remember, for ancient people, outer space did not exist. They believed all the lights in the sky were actually within the Earth's atmosphere, not outside of it. Here is one last example with both heaven and earth together. It also includes a bonus word that we'll talk about in the next episode, the sea. Revelation 21:1, John said, "I saw a new heaven and a new earth, for the old heaven and the old earth had disappeared, along with the sea. John is speaking of a new creation or a new Jerusalem here on earth, where the old and corrupt creation is transformed into a new and better creation. If you still believe heaven is a perfect place outside of earth where perfect people exist, then why would the old heaven disappear? Why would it need to be transformed if it were perfect to begin with? That's because heaven is not a magical place outside of earth. It's the sky. John was speaking of a new sky, a new land, and a new sea, all of which are aspects of an ancient person's observable universe. To recap, the word sky was a word ancient biblical writers used to refer to everything they could see above them, and the word land was a word they used to refer to everything they could see below them. When the biblical writers wrote heaven and earth, they were actually referring to all of creation, the entire universe they were able to observe. Next time you decide to pick up a Bible and read it, regardless of translation, remember that the word heaven simply means sky. It is not referring to a magical place in the afterlife. And the word earth simply means land. So, to answer the question, is heaven biblical? The bad news is, if you define heaven as anything other than the sky, then no, heaven is not biblical.